Jasper is a bore.
Or is he just bored?
How would you like a complete change of routine? We have a job that's a little out of the ordinary.
But our man from the ministry is soon distracted from the job in hand.
Do you do nudes?
There was a life class at the School of Art I went to, but I never really kept it up. Models are expensive.
I'm not.
Starring Michael Maloney,
Come and arrange me how you want me.
Look, are you sure this is all right?
Mariah Aitken and Leslie Phillips.
Disgraceful, Bertie.
What are you talking about, Mabel?
I can explain everything.
How do you like me?
Love on a Branch Line begins next Sunday at 9:10 on BBC One.
In 15 minutes, Sue Lawley presents the first of this week's D-Day news from 50 years ago, as if it were happening today. That's in News 44. Well, first on BBC One, at a little after 9 o'clock, the news of today with Peter Sissons.
A day of tears, memories and spectacle as the D-Day allies assemble again. An armada set sail from Portsmouth for the beaches of Normandy and tomorrow's 50th anniversary. And scattered over the Channel, poppies of remembrance for those who gave everything for freedom. Good evening. 50 years ago tonight, the greatest invasion force ever assembled was waiting for the dawn of D-Day. Today, thousands of veterans gathered on both sides of the Channel and a spectacular new flotilla headed for France. Earlier, in a service at Portsmouth, leaders of the 12 nations involved in Operation Overlord remembered the bravery and the sacrifice.
After yesterday's grey skies, this morning was one of brilliance for the veterans who gathered in their thousands round the War Memorial at Southsea. The traditions of an improvised battlefield service centred round the drums were both a reminder of the need for peace in the present and an act of remembrance for those who set off for the beaches of Normandy.
It is by our actions now that we honour their deaths then. That is the centre of true remembrance, a remembrance we pledge ourselves afresh this day. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
The aircraft carrier Illustrious acknowledged the ceremony, silently gliding past the row of standards from every Allied nation. Afterwards, the Queen met some of those who'd served, other members of the royal family moving into the crowd, followed by President Clinton and over a dozen heads of state and of government. A security headache for officials, but a morning of memories and excitement for the crowds, as the flypast soared overhead, led by the venerable Swordfish. 56 aircraft from 11 nations. Beneath them, a throng of vessels, with the Royal Yacht Britannia heading into the Solent to review everything from modern warships to a paddle steamer which took part in the invasion. The weather stayed kind to those on board. Many of the ships carrying veterans over to Normandy, accompanied by hundreds of tiny pleasure craft. As they made their way, some haphazard and some scurrying round the flotilla, the liner Canberra sailed quietly to mid-channel. The veterans' wreaths were brought forward to be committed to the waves. And then a Lancaster bomber made a stately pass, streaming poppies down onto the sea in commemoration. Kate Adie, BBC News, Portsmouth.
In Normandy, hundreds of British, Canadian and French troops made a parachute drop to reenact the airborne assault that coincided with the invasion. Some American veterans who'd taken part 50 years ago jumped again today.
Along the coast, it's been a day of great parades, mostly American near the western beaches, British near the eastern. The Dutch have been celebrating their liberation too. And it's been a time for honouring old soldiers. Of these, none more adventurous than the 41 American veterans who persuaded a reluctant Pentagon to allow them to jump again after 50 years. The youngest, 68, the oldest, 83. Not all made soft landings. One ended up in hospital, but last time they came down, it was under heavy fire. They made light of the dangers today.
You okay? I jump all the time, this is nothing.
A distinctly British accent at Pegasus Bridge, captured 50 years ago tonight by a small glider-borne force led by Major John Howard. He was at the head of a proud parade today, which was also a time to honour those who fell.
We have come here today to remember those men who died in this place or hereabouts, and to that end, later this afternoon and tomorrow morning, we all gather at the cemetery at Ronville.
And on high ground above the village, the Prince of Wales and the Duke of York, Colonels-in-Chief of the British and Canadian parachute regiments, watched a drop by 1,350 of today's paratroopers in honour of their predecessors. They jumped in 2 waves of 17 Hercules aircraft, and for half an hour, the princes waded knee-deep in crops of peas and wheat to greet the falling paratroopers.
Are you getting enough jumps?
Yeah.
No.
You can never get enough jumps, however.
These were the main events, but this was a day that involved the liberators and liberated in little villages all over the former battlefield. It will not happen on this scale again, and for 100 survivors of the Suffolk Regiment in the village of Colville, Montgomery, this was a time of sadness, gratitude, and nostalgia.
It's a long, long way to Tipperary, and my heart's right there.
Martin Bell, BBC News, Normandy.
Now, other news. The Prime Minister has insisted that the government has no plans to extend VAT. As the last week of campaigning for the European elections got underway, Mr Major accused the opposition parties of engaging in scare tactics. But he wouldn't rule out tax increases, and Labour said he was backing away from pledges made in the general election.
John Major's brushing aside suggestions that his leadership's on the line in the Euro elections, despite his decision to spearhead the Tory campaign himself. Even his critics say they're surprised by how well he's being received. But if results are as bad as polls suggest, his high-profile role could backfire on him. His refusal to rule out VAT on items such as food has caused a row many Tories regard as unavoidable. But once again today, it put him on the defensive.
We do not expect to have to do it. We have no plans to do it. We see no likelihood to do it. But one learns in government it is better never to say never.
But a more categoric assurance on children's clothes and other zero-rated items would have deprived opposition parties of a continuing opportunity to exploit voters' anger on recent tax increases.
The Prime Minister has abandoned a personal commitment he made at the last election not to extend VAT to essential items like food, and I believe he will never be trusted on taxation again.
While usually it would be reasonable for this or any Prime Minister to say that he can't rule things out, he can't rule things in, the fact is this Prime Minister is the one with the track record of broken promises and deceit on VAT.
But as the opposition parties campaign this weekend, they're uncomfortable with recent surveys pointing to catastrophe for the Tories on Thursday. Labour fears its likely gains are being overstated given an unpredictable turnout, while the Liberal Democrats, holding a strategy meeting this evening, believe their prospects have also been overhyped since the Labour leadership question has robbed them of vital publicity. Conservative strategists claim to see a slight rallying of Tory support, but they acknowledge they are facing a poor result. And if there are very substantial losses when the results are known a week from now, Tory discontent with Mr Major's leadership is bound to resurface. Cameradwin, BBC News, Westminster.
The SAS soldiers who shot dead 3 IRA members in Gibraltar 6 years ago did not use unnecessary force, according to the Strasbourg-based European Commission of Human Rights. It rejected claims by relatives that the shootings violated the European Convention safeguarding the right to life, but the relatives welcome the Commission's decision to refer the case to the Higher Court of Human Rights. A British government spokesman said the soldiers' actions would be vigorously defended there too. A UN plane carrying an Italian minister has been shelled by Rwandan government forces as it tried to land in the capital Kigali. No one was hurt in the attack, but the UN has now suspended relief flights from the airport. Earlier, in the first airlift of injured children, about 30 children left for Paris for medical treatment. From Kigali, Mark Doyle.
The children were brought from the rebel-held north to Kigali airport by the French charity Doctors of the World. They were injured by the government militia during the massacres of Tutsi and Hutu government opponents. These are the survivors. They have machete and shrapnel wounds, which can only be treated in modern high-technology hospitals. After treatment, and if there's peace, these children will return to Rwanda. The charity workers want to show the French public what some parts of the Rwandan army have done. The French doctors want to make a political point as well as treat the children. The French government helped to arm and train the Rwandan government army, which participated with the militias in the massacres. Some of the militia have been captured by the rebels. They say they were forced to kill, or they would themselves be killed by the extremist Hutus directing them. The number of people massacred or injured by the militia is far higher than those killed in the conventional war between the government and rebel armies. Mark Doyle, BBC News, Kigali.
Church services have been held in Northern Ireland and the Mull of Kintyre to remember the 29 victims of Thursday's Chinook helicopter disaster. Many members of the rescue services who were at the scene of the crash joined the congregation in Scotland.
The bells of Southend Parish Church called villagers to their regular Sunday worship, their numbers swollen by representatives of the emergency services and senior RAF officers who've been coordinating the grim search operation on the cliff tops less than 12 miles away. Today, the community gathered to remember the victims of the crash. The local lighthouse keeper and his wife, who heard the helicopter come down, were there, along with those who'd been among the first on the scene, united in sorrow at the loss of 29 souls they never knew.
Our service this morning is a service of prayers for healing. It is a service in which we seek to identify with and share the deep sorrow and heartache of families whose deep communion with one another has so cruelly been interrupted.
Further north, within sight of the Ulster coastline, the Kintyre cliffs are still being scoured by teams of police and RAF personnel. Air accident investigators have now extended the search beyond the immediate area of impact. It's an operation which will continue for several days yet. Andrew Cassell, BBC News, Mull of Kintyre.
England's cricketers have failed in their attempt to consign New Zealand to a 4-day defeat in the first Cornhill Test at Trent Bridge. Although they enforced a rule giving them an extra half hour's play, New Zealand survived it to finish on 184 for 7. Earlier, England had declared 316 ahead.
Already in the unaccustomed position of having 500 plus on the board, England's first priority was the quick pursuit of runs. The novelty of the situation too much for Rhodes, who sacrificed his wicket to the cause, one short of a half-century on his debut. But De Freitas further justified his recall by going past 50 before England declared a formidable 316 ahead. Unfortunately, his fellow bowlers initially seemed to find such an advantage disconcerting and were doing their best to make a game of it as over 40 runs were clattered from their first 6 overs. But once again it was De Freitas who restored order, trapping Hartland for 22. Again, much depended on Rutherford, but again he couldn't deliver, smartly snapped up by his opposite number. And when Young followed immediately, the rot had irreversibly set in. As in the first innings, Crowe unfurled a selection of shots that characterised his class, but he'd already lost Fleming's support by the time De Freitas struck once more. 141 for 5 quickly became 141 for 6 with Thompson's dismissal, then 147 for 7 as De Freitas claimed Larson as his third victim. But Perore and Hart proved more resilient, holding out until the close. With rain threatened for tomorrow, they may yet save the match. Kevin GEAREY, BBC News.
Finally, back to the D-Day commemorations. A short while ago, the Royal Yacht Britannia, carrying members of the royal family, 4 prime ministers and VIPs from many of the Allied powers, arrived in Normandy. The Queen was welcomed to France by the Duke of York. Tomorrow, 50 years...